Aristotle was born in the year 384 before the Common Era in the small Greek city of Stagira, located on the northern edge of the Greek world near the border of Macedonia. Unlike Socrates, who lived in poverty, and unlike Plato, who came from an aristocratic political family, Aristotle was born into a household connected to science and medicine. His father, Nicomachus, was a physician who served the royal court of King Amyntas of Macedonia, the grandfather of Alexander the Great. This detail would shape Aristotle's life in profound ways, because from an early age he was exposed not only to intellectual thought, but to systematic observation of the natural world. His father's profession was not based on superstition or myth. It required careful study of the human body, observation of symptoms, and understanding cause and effect. Medicine was one of the few fields at the time that depended on evidence and direct experience rather than tradition alone. As a child, Aristotle likely watched his father examine patients, observe patterns, and draw conclusions from physical reality. This early exposure taught him something that would later define his philosophy. Truth is discovered not only through abstract thinking, but through careful observation of the world. When Aristotle was still young, his father died, leaving him without parental guidance. He was raised by a guardian, but his intellectual path was already forming. At the age of 17, he traveled to Athens, the intellectual center of the Greek world, to join Plato's academy. This was the most advanced philosophical institution of its time. Plato had founded the academy as a place where students could explore mathematics, philosophy, politics, ethics, and the nature of reality itself. Aristotle remained at the academy for approximately 20 years. During this time, he was not simply a passive student. He became one of Plato's most brilliant and dedicated intellectual companions. Plato recognized his extraordinary mind and referred to him as the intellect of the school. Aristotle absorbed Plato's teachings deeply, but he did not accept them blindly. Even as a student, he began developing his own way of thinking. Plato believed that ultimate reality existed in a realm beyond the physical world, a realm of perfect abstract forms. According to Plato, everything in the physical world was an imperfect copy of these perfect forms. A physical object, like a chair, was only an imperfect representation of the perfect concept of a chair, which existed in a higher, invisible reality. Aristotle respected his teacher, but he disagreed with this idea. He believed that reality was not separated into two worlds. He believed that the physical world itself was real and worthy of study. Instead of looking beyond the world, Aristotle believed truth could be discovered by examining the world directly. This difference marked one of the most important turning points in the history of philosophy. Aristotle's method was grounded in observation. He believed that knowledge begins with the senses. Human beings see, hear, touch, and experience the world. And from these experiences, the mind identifies patterns and forms general understanding. Instead of rejecting the physical world as illusion, Aristotle treated it as the foundation of knowledge. During his time at the academy, Aristotle studied a wide range of subjects. He explored logic, biology, ethics, politics, metaphysics, and psychology. Unlike many thinkers who focused on a single area, Aristotle wanted to understand everything. He believed that all areas of knowledge were connected, and that understanding one part of reality helped illuminate others. When Plato died in 347 before the Common Era, leadership of the academy passed to another philosopher. Aristotle, despite his brilliance, was not chosen as leader. This may have been due to his disagreements with Plato's philosophical ideas, or because he was not originally from Athens. After Plato's death, Aristotle left the academy and began a new phase of his life. He traveled to the city of Assos, where he continued his philosophical work. During this time, he began studying biology in a serious and systematic way. He observed plants, animals, and marine life, carefully recording their structures and behaviors. He dissected animals to understand their anatomy. He classified different species based on shared characteristics. This was revolutionary. While earlier thinkers had speculated about nature, Aristotle studied it directly. He believed that every living being had a purpose and structure that could be understood through observation. He saw order in nature, not chaos. He saw patterns that revealed deeper principles governing life itself. During this period, Aristotle married a woman named Pythias, who was related to the ruler of Assos. This relationship provided stability and support, allowing him to continue his intellectual work. Soon after, Aristotle received an invitation that would change his life and the course of history. King Philip II of Macedonia invited him to become the tutor of his young son, Alexander. This boy would later become known as Alexander the Great, one of the most powerful conquerors in history. Aristotle accepted the position and spent several years teaching Alexander. He did not simply teach him military tactics. He taught him philosophy, ethics, politics, literature, and science. He taught him how to think, not just how to rule. He introduced Alexander to Greek culture, shaping his intellectual development. Although Alexander would later become known primarily for conquest, Aristotle's influence remained present. Alexander carried Greek ideas and culture across vast territories, indirectly spreading Aristotle's intellectual influence. After completing his work as Alexander's tutor, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school, known as the Lyceum. This school differed from Plato's academy. Aristotle emphasized empirical research, observation, and systematic study. He and his students walked together through the grounds while discussing ideas, which is why his followers became known as the Peripatetics, meaning those who walk around. At the Lyceum, Aristotle began producing the works that would define his legacy. He wrote on logic, creating the first formal system of reasoning in human history. He studied ethics, asking what it means to live a good life. He studied politics, examining how societies function. He studied metaphysics, exploring the nature of existence itself. His approach was different from Socrates, who focused on questioning, and different from Plato, who focused on abstract forms. Aristotle focused on understanding reality through structure, observation, and reason. He believed that the world was intelligible. He believed that truth could be discovered. He believed that human beings, through careful thought and observation, could understand the principles governing existence. And in pursuing this belief, Aristotle would build one of the most comprehensive intellectual systems ever created by a single human mind. When Aristotle established his school, the Lyceum, in Athens around 335 before the Common Era, he was no longer simply a student or a tutor. He had become an independent thinker with a clear vision of what knowledge should be. The Lyceum was not just a place for abstract discussion. It was a center of systematic research, something the ancient world had never seen before. Aristotle believed that knowledge should not depend only on argument or tradition. It should be built from observation, classification, and careful reasoning. His school became a place where students collected information about plants, animals, governments, human behavior, and physical reality itself. Unlike Plato's academy, which focused heavily on abstract philosophical questions, the Lyceum functioned almost like an early research institute. Aristotle and his students gathered specimens of animals and plants. They observed their anatomy, their movement, their habitats, and their patterns of life. Aristotle himself dissected animals and recorded their internal structures. He compared different species and identified similarities and differences. From this, he created one of the first biological classification systems in history. He grouped animals based on shared characteristics, such as whether they had blood or did not have blood, whether they gave birth to live young or laid eggs. This may seem simple today, but at the time, it was revolutionary. Most people explain nature using myth, believing that animals existed according to the will of gods or supernatural forces. Aristotle instead treated nature as something governed by consistent principles that could be understood through observation. He believed that every living being had a specific function and structure that serve a purpose. This idea became central to his philosophy. He believed that nothing in nature existed randomly. Everything had a cause and a purpose. This led him to develop one of his most important philosophical concepts, the theory of the four causes. Aristotle believed that to truly understand anything, one must understand four different aspects of it. The material cause, which is what something is made of. The formal cause, which is the structure or design of the thing. The efficient cause, which is the force or action that brought it into existence. And the final cause, which is the purpose for which it exists. For example, if someone examines a statue, the material cause would be the stone or bronze it is made from. The formal cause would be the shape of the statue. The efficient cause would be the sculptor who created it. And the final cause would be the purpose of the statue, perhaps to honor someone or to represent beauty. Aristotle believed that understanding these four causes allowed a person to fully understand reality. This concept extended beyond physical objects. He applied it to living beings, human behavior, and even the structure of society. He believed that everything moves toward fulfilling its purpose. A seed grows into a tree because its purpose is to become a tree. A human being seeks knowledge because the human mind is naturally oriented toward understanding. Aristotle also made one of the most important contributions to the field of logic. Before Aristotle, people used reasoning, but there was no formal system that explained how reasoning worked. Aristotle created a structured method for analyzing arguments, known as syllogistic logic. This system allowed people to examine whether a conclusion logically followed from its premises. For example, if all humans are mortal and Socrates is a human, then Socrates is mortal. This structure may seem obvious, but Aristotle was the first to formally explain how such reasoning works. His system of logic became the foundation of rational thought for over 2,000 years. It influenced science, mathematics, philosophy, and even modern computing. In addition to studying nature and logic, Aristotle also explored human psychology. In his work on the soul, he examined the nature of consciousness and life itself. He believed that the soul was not a separate object trapped inside the body, but rather the organizing principle of a living being. The soul was what allowed a living thing to function, to grow, to perceive, and to think. He identified different levels of soul. Plants possess the ability to grow and reproduce. Animals possess the ability to perceive and move. Humans possess the additional ability to reason. This capacity for reason, he believed, was what made humans unique. Aristotle also carefully studied human happiness. In his work known as the Nicomachean Ethics, named after his father Nicomachus or possibly his son, he explored one of the most important questions of human life. What does it mean to live well? He observed that all human actions aim toward some goal. People seek wealth, pleasure, honor, or knowledge because they believe these things will make them happy. But Aristotle argued that true happiness, which he called eudaimonia, was not simply pleasure or temporary satisfaction. True happiness, according to Aristotle, is the result of living in accordance with one's highest nature. For human beings, this highest nature is reason. Therefore, a good life is one in which a person develops their rational abilities and lives with virtue. Virtue, in Aristotle's philosophy, is not extreme behavior. It is balance. He introduced the concept of the golden mean. Every virtue exists between two extremes. Courage exists between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity exists between greed and wastefulness. Confidence exists between insecurity and arrogance. A virtuous person learns to find balance, acting neither excessively nor deficiently. This idea reflected Aristotle's deep understanding of human psychology. He recognized that extreme behavior often leads to instability and suffering. Balance creates harmony. Aristotle also studied politics in detail. In his work Politics, he examined different systems of government. He analyzed monarchies, aristocracies, and democracies. He observed how governments functioned in real cities, not just in theory. He believed that the purpose of government was to create conditions in which citizens could live good and virtuous lives. He understood that humans are naturally social beings. He famously said that man is a political animal, meaning that humans naturally live in communities and depend on one another. A person living completely alone cannot fully develop their human potential. During his years at the Lyceum, Aristotle and his students collected vast amounts of knowledge. They studied constitutions of different cities, animal species, natural phenomena, and human behavior. Aristotle's intellectual ambition was enormous. He was not satisfied with understanding one part of reality. He wanted to understand all of it. His work created the foundation for biology, logic, psychology, ethics, and political science. He transformed philosophy from abstract speculation into systematic investigation. He showed that the world could be studied, understood, and explained through reason. And through this work, Aristotle became not just a philosopher. He became one of the architects of human knowledge itself. As Aristotle continued his work at the Lyceum, his intellectual system expanded into areas that no thinker before him had explored with such depth and precision. He was not content with simply observing the world. He wanted to understand the deepest structure of existence itself. This led him to develop his most complex and profound philosophical work, later called metaphysics. The word metaphysics was not originally his own term. It was given later by scholars to describe the part of his work that examined questions beyond physical observation, questions about being, existence, cause, and the ultimate nature of reality. Aristotle began with a simple but powerful question. What does it mean for something to exist? At first, this may seem obvious. Objects exist, people exist, animals exist. But Aristotle realized that existence itself contains layers. A seed exists, but it is not yet a tree. A child exists, but is not yet an adult. Something can exist in potential form and later exist in actual form. This distinction between potential and actuality became one of the central ideas of his philosophy. He observed that everything in the world moves from potential toward actuality. A block of marble has the potential to become a statue. Through the work of a sculptor, that potential becomes actual. A young person has the potential to become wise. Through experience and learning, that potential becomes reality. Aristotle believed that understanding this process was essential to understanding change itself. He also asked what ultimately causes motion and existence. If everything is caused by something else, then what caused the very first cause? This question led him to develop the concept of the unmoved mover. Aristotle reasoned that there must be a final source of motion that itself is not moved by anything else. This unmoved mover is pure actuality, without potential, without change, eternal and perfect. It does not move things through physical force, but by being the ultimate object of desire and purpose. Everything in existence moves toward fulfillment, and this fulfillment reflects the influence of the unmoved mover. This idea would later influence religious philosophy for centuries, shaping ideas about divine reality in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. But Aristotle himself did not describe the unmoved mover as a personal god in the way later religions would. It was more like the ultimate principle of order and existence. Aristotle also explored the structure of human thinking itself. He examined how humans perceive reality, how memory works, how imagination operates, and how reasoning develops. He understood that human knowledge begins with sensory experience. People see, hear, and touch the world, and from these experiences, the mind identifies patterns. These patterns form concepts. From concepts, humans develop reasoning. He recognized that knowledge is not instant. It develops gradually, moving from perception to understanding. This idea would later become a foundation of scientific method. Aristotle also studied rhetoric, the art of persuasion. Unlike the sophists, who taught persuasion as a tool for personal success, Aristotle analyzed persuasion as a psychological process. In his work Rhetoric, he explained that persuasion depends on three elements: ethos, which is the character and credibility of the speaker; pathos, which is the emotional connection with the audience; and logos, which is the logical structure of the argument. He understood that human beings are not persuaded by logic alone. Emotion and trust play essential roles. This insight revealed Aristotle's deep understanding of human psychology. He saw that human beings are not purely rational. Their decisions are shaped by emotion, habit, and social influence. One of his most important works on science was his study of animals, later called History of Animals. In this work, Aristotle described hundreds of species in remarkable detail. He observed their anatomy, reproduction, movement, and behavior. He identified patterns that would not be fully rediscovered until modern biology. He recognized that dolphins were not fish, but air-breathing creatures. He described the development of chick embryos inside eggs. He understood that the heart plays a central role in the body. Although some of his biological conclusions were limited by the tools of his time, his method of observation set a new standard. He showed that nature could be understood through systematic study rather than myth. Aristotle also examined human relationships and friendship in his ethical writings. He believed that friendship was essential to a meaningful life. He identified different types of friendship. Some friendships exist for utility, based on mutual benefit. Others exist for pleasure, based on enjoyment. But the highest form of friendship, he believed, exists between individuals who share virtue. These friendships are based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to living well. He believed that humans achieve their fullest potential not in isolation, but in community. A person develops virtue through interaction with others. Society, in his view, was not simply a practical arrangement. It was a necessary environment for human flourishing. Aristotle's influence extended beyond philosophy and science. His student, Alexander, would go on to conquer vast territories, spreading Greek culture across Egypt, Persia, and parts of India. Although Aristotle did not participate in these conquests, his intellectual influence traveled with Alexander's empire. Greek language, science, and philosophy spread across the known world. At the Lyceum, Aristotle continued teaching, writing, and researching for many years. His school became one of the most important intellectual centers in the ancient world. Students came to learn not only philosophy, but methods of investigation. Aristotle had achieved something extraordinary. He had created a complete system for understanding reality. He had explained how humans think. He had explained how living beings function. He had explained how societies operate. He had explained how reasoning works. He had shown that the world was not chaos, but order, and that through careful observation and disciplined thought, human beings could understand their place within it. In the final years of Aristotle's life, the world around him began to change in ways he could not control. His former student, Alexander, had risen to unprecedented power. Alexander had conquered the Persian Empire, extending his rule across vast territories stretching from Greece to Egypt and deep into Asia. Greek culture, language, and intellectual influence spread across these lands, carried by soldiers, administrators, and scholars. Aristotle's ideas, indirectly, became part of this expansion. His approach to logic, science, and reasoning began influencing minds far beyond Athens. But power and expansion also created tension. In 323 before the Common Era, Alexander died suddenly at the age of 32. His death created political instability throughout the Greek world. Athens, which had lived under Macedonian dominance, began to resist foreign influence. Anti-Macedonian sentiment grew strong. Aristotle, because of his close association with the Macedonian royal family, became a target of suspicion. The situation grew dangerous. He was accused of impiety, the same charge that had been used decades earlier against Socrates. The accusation was not truly about religion. It was political. Aristotle understood what had happened to Socrates. He understood how easily public fear and anger could turn against a philosopher. He made a decision that reflected both wisdom and realism. Rather than remain in Athens and risk execution, he chose to leave. He reportedly said that he would not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy. With this statement, He acknowledged the execution of Socrates and refused to allow himself to suffer the same fate. He fled Athens and traveled to the city of Chalcis, located on the island of Euboea. There, he spent his final year. His health had begun to decline. Years of constant intellectual labor, teaching, writing, and research had taken their toll. His body weakened, but his intellectual legacy was already complete. In 322 before the Common Era, Aristotle died at the age of 62. Unlike Socrates, he did not die through execution. Unlike Alexander, he did not die in conquest. He died quietly, leaving behind something far more enduring than political power. He left behind a complete framework for human knowledge. What makes Aristotle unique in history is not simply the number of subjects he studied, but the depth and structure he brought to each one. He did not treat knowledge as disconnected fragments. He saw knowledge as a unified system, where logic, biology, psychology, ethics, politics, and metaphysics were all connected. His work on logic remained the dominant system of reasoning for more than 2,000 years. Every structured argument, every scientific hypothesis, every philosophical analysis that followed was shaped by the logical principles he established. His work in biology remained influential until the scientific revolution. He was one of the first humans to treat living organisms as subjects of careful observation rather than myth. His work in ethics reshaped the understanding of human happiness. He rejected the idea that happiness comes from pleasure alone. He showed that true fulfillment comes from living with virtue, balance, and rational understanding. He taught that human beings achieve excellence not by accident, but through habit. A person becomes courageous by practicing courage. A person becomes wise by practicing thinking. Excellence is not an event. It is a pattern of living. His work in politics shaped the understanding of society itself. He showed that governments must be evaluated not by their power, but by their ability to create conditions where human beings can live meaningful and virtuous lives. His metaphysical work explored the deepest structure of existence, influencing religious and philosophical thought for centuries. But perhaps Aristotle's greatest contribution was his method. He showed that truth is not discovered through authority or tradition alone. It is discovered through observation, reasoning, and careful examination. He showed that the human mind is capable of understanding the world. He showed that knowledge is not something given. It is something built. Centuries after his death, his writings were preserved, translated, and studied across civilizations. Islamic scholars such as Avicenna and Averroes studied his work deeply, preserving it during times when much of ancient knowledge was at risk of being lost. Later, his ideas returned to Europe, influencing thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, who integrated Aristotle's philosophy into theological systems. Even as modern science developed new tools and new discoveries, Aristotle's influence remained present. His questions about existence, purpose, ethics, and human flourishing continued to shape intellectual thought. Aristotle began his life as the son of a physician in a small Greek city. He became the student of Plato. He became the teacher of Alexander. He became the founder of his own school. He became the architect of logic, biology, ethics, and systematic philosophy. He did not conquer nations. He conquered ignorance. He did not build empires of land. He built an empire of understanding. And more than 2,000 years later, his mind continues to live in every effort to understand truth, reason, and the nature of existence itself.